Hello students, let us continue our discussion of Surfacing by Margaret Atwood. As we know from the previous section of this video that the protagonist searches for her father on the island. She wants to know where he has gone, whether he became insane before he died. The protagonist is not successful in the beginning. She is furious with him for vanishing without informing her. And it is very strange to note that the father of the protagonist, being an old man, lived all alone in the cabin. But for the protagonist herself, it is not a surprise because he disliked people. The narrator, because she is unsuccessful in the first attempt, searches for clues in her childhood books for the whereabouts of her father and comes to know that before vanishing, her father had been working at some rock paintings. Therefore, she once again begins to search for the rock paintings. The protagonist with her friends go to the forest where they come across a mutilated heron. So we understand that the search for missing father is interlinked with the search for self. As she goes to search for her father, she finds the mutilated body of a bird called heron. We find the reaction of all the characters towards this body of heron. When we read the novel, we find that as soon as Anna saw the body of dead heron, she held her nose, not because she had any real feeling towards it, but she only wanted to make an impression on men, whereas Joe responded with a passive look, and David, as soon as he saw the body of the dead bird, he was excited. He thought it to be a material for his movie, random samples. We also note from the novel that Anna calls the movie as random pimples, and when a narrator saw the body of the heron, she was deeply repulsed. She identifies herself with the dead heron and views herself as powerless as the heron. She thinks the killing of the heron as a meaningless act because nobody eats this bird. It is as if the killers of this bird wanted to prove their power by killing it. The protagonist and her friends think that it must have been killed by the Americans. Later, they come to know that they are not the ones who killed the bird are not Americans but Canadians. But still, the narrator wants to believe that it is committed by the Americans. Let me quote a passage from the novel. It doesn't matter what country they are from, my head said. They are still Americans. They are what is in store for us, what we are turning into. They spread themselves like a virus. They get into the brain and take over the cells, and the cells change from inside, and the ones that have the disease can't tell the difference. So, an American enjoys killing things, whereas Canadian considers killing of animals as a negative thing. One of the critics commented on this, saying that in American literature, if you killed an animal, it means that you have achieved something, whereas in Canada, if you killed an animal, it is a negative achievement. Further in the novel, we find Joe proposing to the protagonist, and the protagonist rejects. She feels that there is no need to get married because she and Joe have already living together. And after the bitter experiences of her first marriage, she has lost faith in the legal phrases, paperwork, and vows, and there is no meaning for the word love. That is what she feels towards marriage. And in the case of David and Anna, we have already discussed about their marital life, but there's something more to add to it. Here, the author Atwood parodies the conventional marriage system. We find that David and Anna hate each other. The narrator thinks about David and Anna that they are perfectly happy couple, but later they come to know, that is, the narrator comes to know that their relationship is ruled by jealousy, teasing, lack of mutual trust, deviousness, and hostility towards each other. So, after her initial futile search for her missing father, the narrator wants to search for him in the lake. She is not able to trace him down with the clues he gives in his rock paintings. So, she decides to search for him in the lake. She literally dives into the water to search for him, and in one of her attempts, she beholds a dead body inside the water, in the water. At first, she imagines it to be her brother's body, but later she comes to know that it is in fact her unborn baby. When she remembers that her brother was still alive, she thinks about her child to which they never gave a chance to be born. Thus, the drowned body of her father reminds her of her own aborted child. At last, the protagonist comes to accept her real life. Until this point, she had been living in false memories and telling lies. Her marriage, divorce, and child are only fabrications to disguise her affair with a married man by whom she had a child and forced to undergo abortion. The abortion was so painful to her that she was unable to accept the reality. Thus, we understand that her problem is that she lives in the past that did not exist. So, when we read the novel, we also note that the protagonist was forced to undergo abortion on the same day as the day on which her husband, that is, the man with whom she had an affair, one of his children was having a birthday party at home. So this makes her feel devastated. After the abortion at home, she feels emptied, amputated, and feels as if they have planted death in her. And from then onwards, she has been carrying the death of her child. She carries death inside her like a cyst, tumor, black pearl. She also complains of separation of her body and head, thus suggesting her incapacity to feel love. After she dives into the lake, she understands her problem and it helps her to integrate her body with the head. So, once she takes a deep dive into the lake, she understands that all this time she was having a guilty feeling of killing her child. The father of the protagonist is the one who makes her to realize it. Therefore, in the novel, it is mentioned as the gift of the father. He gives clues to her to locate the dead body and realize that it was her abortion that has made her entertain a frozen attitude towards love, life, and marriage. And she also, after this realization that she has been living in a false world, she also looks for the clues given by her mother. And in one of the scrapbooks, she finds the gift of the mother. To quote from the novel, the gift was a loose page, the edge torn, the figures drawn in crayon. On the left was a woman with a round moon stomach. The baby was sitting up inside her, gazing out. So we understand that once the protagonist understands what her problem is, she tries to solve it. She wants to release herself from the guilt of killing a baby by having another child. After having an association with Joe, she feels that she can have once again another child, and this child will forgive her, will release her from whatever guilt she has been suffering from. She also releases Anna. We know from the novel that David had taken a naked picture of Anna. The protagonist wants to release Anna by destroying the snaps taken. She pulls the reels out of the camera. So she destroys the entire film that David and Joe had been taking for their movie Random Samples. The protagonist for some time lives alone on the island because she wants to be all alone. She did not want to live a powerless life. She wants to be independent and powerful. So later on, she realizes that if she is not having proper food and care, her baby will not survive. She wants the baby to survive. She wants to give it a chance. In order to do that, she feels that she should go back to the city. She refuses to be a victim and refuses to be powerless. And after this realization dawns on her, she finds Joe coming in search of her. So she wants to go with Joe to the city and live there. Now she also notes that Joe is not an American. If he is anything, he is only half formed, and so she can trust him. The ending of this novel is ambiguous. We note in the novel that the narrator is inside the cabin and Joe is calling her name outside. So we don't know whether the protagonist really goes with Joe or she stays back. It is an open ended novel. Several critics have commented on the open ended novel. I will read out some of them. So I'm reading the comment of one particular critic by name Cheryl Grace. So in her words, by the end surfacing, the narrator has succeeded in her quest. She has found what she needs to begin a new, complete, and free life. So, by the end of this novel, the protagonist is successful. She has found what she was searching. It was the search for self, a search for identity. Therefore, the narrator is successful. Another critic by name George Woodcock says that this novel is a novel of self-realization, a novel of life realization. So here the narrator or the protagonist knows how she had become a victim in the male dominated society and how she overcomes that feeling of being a victim. When we look at the narration of this novel, we note that in part 1 and 3, the narrator narrates the story in the present tense, whereas in part 2, the narrator narrates it in past tense. Atwood makes use of this method to show us the self alienation of the narrator, her journey into her past with the past tense, and the sense of immediate felt experience with the present. So, the use of tense should be noted. In part 1 and 2, in part 1 and 3, it is in present tense, whereas in part 2, since it describes self alienation, this has been written in past tense. We also should note water, the symbol water, which is an important symbol in surfacing. Water becomes an agent that promotes metamorphosis, changing the psyche of the narrator. Metamorphosis means to change. So here the narrator changes from being an alienated person to somebody who is able to accept herself. It is a symbol of her purification and survival. After diving into the water, after undergoing a submergence in the water, she comes to accept the reality. As a submerged self in water, she undergoes the necessary purification that enables her to face the reality, and with the newly acquired knowledge, she feels confident enough to rejoin society she has left behind. In Atwood's words, water is a symbol of Canadian identity. In Atwood's words, water is important in my work because if you look at an aerial map of Canada, you will see that there is more water per square mile there than in almost any other country on earth. Therefore, the key element for Canada is water. In surfacing, we find there is a journey. So, the narrator takes up a journey to go in search of her father. The protagonist's journey begins with a physical, geographical journey in search of her father, and later it turns out to be a psychological, spiritual journey as she conducts a parallel search for her own lost self. She discovers her father's corpse and makes a simultaneous discovery about herself. When she surfaces from the depths of the lake, her submerged self comes to a new knowledge and a reassessment of herself in relation to the world. The submergence in the primitive world leads to a subsequent realignment with the lived world with a new vision. Thank you.